sign a discharge petition, the leadership is obligated to bring the bill to the floor for a vote. They're at, so they need 217 or 208, something like that. They're about 190 right now. And it's the Republicans and the Blue Dog Democrats who are aligned on this thing. And we're not quite sure where it's going to go. There is a very good chance that this thing will be passed this year. That's the SAVE Act. That's our #1 immigration issue, because it is directed at immigrants. But the way we're addressing this is we're trying to look at it from a good government perspective, a privacy perspective, and talking about this database that gets created that has so many flaws in it that we think it will overwhelm the Social Security Administration. So that's sort of an example of what we're doing playing defense. But I have to say that there are some things that we can try to do on a proactive agenda. I'm also sad to say that there are some things we can do on a proactive agenda. Did anybody see the series in the Washington Post earlier this week about medical care in detention facilities? Yeah. You know, a four-day series talking about just horrendous conditions in detention facilities. The number of people who are in detention and awaiting deportation in any day is 30 or 35,000 people. About 300,000 people per year that are going through this process. Most of them are actually held in state or local facilities, although a number of them are held in federal detention facilities. The medical conditions and the medical treatment received by these folks that are in detention is scattershot at best. And the series in the Washington Post amply demonstrated that. If you can look it up online, I would highly recommend it to you. It'll take you a while to get through it, and it'll make you cry. It really will. There was also a story on 60 Minutes. This is an issue that we at Social Security, excuse me, I just had a 30-year flashback. We at the ACLU have been talking about it for a long time. We've been talking about it in the regulatory sense. We've been having regular meetings with the folks in Homeland Security through the executive branch, as well as talking with folks in Congress about this. There have been hearings on this, sort of scattered every few months on this, but just recently, just literally when this Post story came out, that seemed to catch fire, and all of a sudden I've got a few more hearings scheduled, and Congress all of a sudden gets interested in it, and boom, Representative Lofgren from California and Senator Menendez from New Jersey introduced bills to try to improve medical care in these facilities. I just want to give you a sense of some of the examples of detainees who have done it. And so, you know, what we're doing here, this is getting back to the basic fairness argument that I was talking about at the outset. If we're going to detain people, you can't abuse them. You know, argue about whether we ought to be detaining people somewhere else. But if you're going to detain people, you ought not be treating them in a way that makes them die. And so there's a 52-year-old person fractured his head during a fall and started behaving erratically. On-site medical staff assumed he was acting out and shackled him to the floor as he moaned and vomited. He was put in solitary confinement where he lay untreated for more than 13 hours despite repeated notations by staff that he was unresponsive and foaming at the mouth. Finally, he was sent to the hospital where he died after 4 months in a coma. And his stuff, distasteful stuff. 35-year-old Francisco Castaneda, who was an ACLU client, sought medical care for lesions on his penis. On-site medical staff repeatedly ordered biopsies, but the biopsies were denied by off-site reviewers. After 11 months in custody, ICE, the agency that's in charge of the detention facilities, released Francisco so he could pay for his own biopsy. They refused to do it themselves, and when it appeared from their on-site staff that he was going to need serious treatment, they released him so they wouldn't have to pay for it. And that revealed cancerous tumors. Despite penile amputation and several rounds of chemotherapy, He died in February, or late January, early February, at the age of 36. We had him testify before Congress last fall. He died in February. And you know, these are just two stories. I've got a list on them. So ACLU is able to get involved in this by trying to advance legislation that appeals to a bipartisan group of individuals. And so we've got this medical care bill that's been introduced in the House and in the Senate. We're very hopeful after hearings over the next month or two that perhaps this is one of those bills that we might be able to find a way to advance. And this is where our work is now in the immigration area, is trying to find these kind of issues where we can actually have an impact on some people's lives for the better, even if we can't get to some of the other aspects of the immigration debate because of the nature of the political environment right now. The folks in our Immigrants' Rights Project out in the West Coast are involved in this to a certain extent, but also we're combining forces with them and with the folks in our National Prison Project. They're based in Washington. They're not part of our legislative office, but they're based in D.C. Our efforts to do this, and we're also working with affiliates who actually represented some of these folks who were in detention and not getting medical treatment. That's the kind of thing that the ACLU can do in a way that very few other organizations can, because we have affiliates in all of the states around the country. We have a substantial legislative operation in D.C. We have litigators who are the best at what they do. And so we'll keep on looking for those kind of issues to advance. You know, that means there's something bad going on when we find one of those issues, but those are the kinds of things where we think there will be, there's a way that we can go. There's a couple of other things like that. For example, we're working on issues of whether it's okay to keep people out of the country based upon their HIV status. You know, we tend to get a little bit more support for that kind of thing. We were successful in getting a policy change that the customs folks were sedating people before they deported them to make them a little more compliant as they were putting them onto the planes. Got that policy changed so they can't do that now without a court order. What a thought. And then there's also the issue of the material support bar. Some people are kept out of the country because they are deemed to have supported organizations that are considered suspect, certain kinds of charitable organizations. And so we're working on language that might modify that kind of thing. Again, it gets to the core of Americans' consideration of what it means to be an American, that everybody ought to be able to get the same advantages of our society, even if they hold different political views. And so that's another kind of thing that we're working on. Probably not going to get anything done on that in this Congress, but it's another issue that we tend to get support, not just from one side of the aisle. So I think I want to wrap up here and answer your questions, but I am reminded. I was at a dinner earlier this week, the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, and one of the people who was being honored was Representative John Conyers, who's been in Congress since 1964 or something like that. And in his comments, he noted that about a third of the world's population gets by on about $1 a day. And he asked everybody in the room to just think about why people might want to come here. You know, it doesn't matter where you are. You know, people are concerned about their family and about, you know, people having a good life, or at least a tolerable life. The United States has a reputation of, you know, living a pretty good life here. You don't even have to get to the point of political considerations. You know, if I were sitting somewhere in Central America and I was living the kind of life that I was desperate to avoid for my daughter, you know, I think I'd do just about anything to try and get to a place where, you know, I at least have hope of a little bit better future.